The house needs painting, the grass needs mowing. Where's he at?
Hi, this is Hank. Sorry I missed your call. Leave me your name and your number and I'll get back to you.
He's gone fishing.
Hello and welcome to Hank Parker Off the Water. I'm here with my granddaughter, Sarah Beth. Say hello. You beat me to it.
I sure did.
Yeah, I like that.
2 steps ahead of you.
Yeah, step ahead.
Always.
Always. I like that. Hey, today is very exciting. I get so excited about telling stories about the history of fishing. And I got involved before it was ever a big deal. And as you well know, today professional bass fishing is a big deal. So I want to give my perspective from the players that built the foundation of this sport and how it all came about from my point of view. And I've been involved from the very beginning. And I've got Sarah Beth here to keep me in line.
I'll try my best.
Yeah, it's really hard for me sometimes. I have to jump around a lot to establish why I think the way I think. So sometimes I will advance 3 or 4 years in a single statement. So Sarah Beth, you're going to have to keep me in check where I don't run off and leave my audience with information that's out of context. So
I can do that.
Well, that'll be important. Kind of keep me in line.
Pray for me.
Well, that's probably a good starting point. That's always a good starting point. So let me kind of tell my story. And this is what really inspired me to do a podcast, is the fact that I've been around. I'm kind of a dinosaur. I've been around from the beginning, and it's really fascinating from my point of view. And I hope that I can express that and tell this story from my perspective, that you understand where I'm coming from, that I don't get it so convoluted and so confusing that you can't follow what I'm trying to describe and what I've been a part of. So let's start off with Ray Scott, the bass boss, the dreamer, the founder of Bass Angler Sportsman Society. Ray and I got started off, Sarah Beth, on a very bad foot.
Oh, no. Tell me about that.
I was fishing National Bass Association because I didn't have a horsepower. There was a limit that bass had 150, and I had 175 Black Max on my Ranger boat. So I was illegal to fish bass because I had 25 horsepower too much. So I started out fishing national bass, American bass, and United bass. So I wasn't a BASS fisherman at the beginning of my career in 1976. So National Bass Association, there was a guy there that was a promoter, and they put together a trip to Cuba.
Oh, Cuba.
Cuba. And so, man, I was excited. I had seen pictures and film. I wanted to say video, but it was way before video. It was film of people fishing on Treasure Lake in Cuba. And I dreamed, man, if I could go there. They were these dragonflies that would fly over the lake.
Yeah.
And bass would actually jump out of the water and take them out of midair.
Wow.
And I thought, God, a million bass, what would it be like? So I was dying to go to Cuba. Well, Ray was adamantly against going to Cuba. He thought that that was a threat to our national security and made you feel as if you were a traitor. But we actually went to fish an American-Cuban bass tournament on Treasure Lake in Cuba. So I went there and I fished, and we chartered an airplane out of Havana to come back to Tampa to fish Ray's very first tournament.
Wow.
And so Ray Scott, what he wanted you to do at a pairings meeting, he would call out your name, and he wanted you to say loud enough that he could hear you clearly. He'd say, North Carolina's Hank Parker. And you would raise your hand and say, here, very clear. And then he would say, and Tennessee's Jack Wade, here. then Jack Wade and I are to make eye contact and raise our hands where he sees me, I see him, and now we're partners.
Okay.
So Ray would go through that list quickly. So he didn't want to stop and look up. He wanted you to call out your name clearly, and he'd move to the next two, and he'd pair you up, and he'd go through 250 guys. If everybody cooperated right, he'd go through that list in about 40 minutes. So it was a knock them out, get it done, be clear, raise your hand, holler loud. And so when he said, I'd just flown in from Cuba,
Yeah.
which he was adamantly against. When he said, North Carolina's Hank Parker, I said, here. Well, he normally doesn't look up at all. He goes right on to say Tennessee's Jack Wade, and that would be my partner. But he didn't. He stopped. And when I said Hank Parker and raised my hand, he made eye contact with me for what seemed like 10 minutes. I mean, he was really looking through me, showing me his displeasure that I went to Cuba.
Right.
So this was kind of a tense start for Ray Scott and myself, and this was 1978, January 1978. So Ray and I, we did not get off on the best foot.
He thinks you're a communist. That's what it was.
That's exactly. And he made me feel as if I had betrayed America and was a communist, and that was not at all the case. I was a young kid that wanted to go fishing where there was a million bass, and that was all it was to it. And I never looked at the political ramification. And Jim Broyhill was my senator at that time, a Republican conservative senator. And so I wrote him a letter and asked him what he thought. And he was fine with it. He thought it was a great idea. It could help diplomat relationships. I didn't look at it from a political standpoint at all. I just wanted to go fishing where there were a million big bass. So that's what I did. And so Ray and I got off on a rocky start. And as time went on, at the end of 1978, I finished 9th in the standings. They only took 25 guys to the Bassmaster Classic, 24 pros, and one Federation guy.
Okay.
So now I'm in the Bassmaster Classic. I qualified, the top 10 my first year. Big deal, big deal. So the last tournament of the year was at West Point Lake in Georgia. And so after the tournament was over, Ray said, all right, guys, we're going to print the standings. And if you're in the top 24, we want you to stay here and be a part of the Classic meeting. We're going to have a brief meeting, and we'll go over what's going to take place to get ready for the Bassmaster Classic. So I stayed, and we all gathered in a room there at West Point, and we had a meeting, and I waited till everybody left, and I went up, and I said, Mr. Scott, man, these tournaments are so professional. I really appreciate your integrity. I appreciate all the professionalism that your tournaments have, and I have enjoyed immensely the opportunity to compete in your tournaments. And he said, well, thank you, Hank. What you got on your mind? I said, well, Ray, I'm not going to go to the Classic. He said, what? You're not going to go? You qualified, and you're not going to fish in the Classic? What in the world could keep you from fishing? Nobody doesn't fish in the Classic.
Why would you give that up?
Yeah, and he couldn't. I said, Ray, my dad was an alcoholic, and beer is what got him started down that dirt road of being addicted to alcohol. And I said, Miller High Life is the sponsor of the Bassmaster Classic, and written on the side of the boats, and I said, I'm just extremely convicted and uncomfortable of being a part of promoting a beer company. And he started laughing. He said, I appreciate your conviction. I really do. I think that's admirable. But Miller's out. There's not going to be anything on the side of that boat. There'll be no beer companies there. You come and fish the Classic. Well, I was elated. But Ray somehow deeply respected the fact that he knew I was serious. I was not going to compete if Miller High Life was on the side of that boat. And I think Ray gained a respect for me, and I certainly gained a deep respect for him that he was not offended by that. He actually admired the fact that I had conviction. So Ray and I started then, after a rocky start, we built a solid friendship. And as time went on, Ray put together an incredible deer lease in the state of Texas. And he called me, just a handful of guys, he called me to be a part of that group, which is a highest form of flattery. I mean, he thought enough of me. Farshwood was one of the members, and he put me in that league, which I was just blown away and flattered, and which I got in that deer lease, and it was just incredible with Ray and Forrest and Glenn Lau and Dale Earnhardt and Richard Childers, and we just put a incredible group of fine people together that was fun to hang out with. So in all of that, Ray and I kind of became hunting buddies. And Lonnie Stanley and Mike Dyche put together a hunting lease in Mexico. Now, I know I'm running rabbits, but I want to establish my relationship with Ray to give you a better idea of how I understood Ray. And so all of this, I know I'm jumping years ahead, but if you can follow where I'm coming from, I'm trying to establish my relationship with Ray Scott.
Right.
So Lonnie and Mike put this hunting lease together in Mexico. And I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere, about 200 miles across the border. And Ray and I got together. We flew out there together, and we drove across the border and into Mexico, just Ray and I. So we had a long conversation. Well, as we were getting there, unbeknownst to us, they were predicting torrential rain. Well, this land has no bottom. I mean, when it rains, it's like quicksand everywhere. You can't drive on it. You can't even walk. You can't even go outside. So as Ray and I was getting close to the ranch, it started to drizzle. And by the time we got into the yard at the little adobe house in Mexico, it is now pouring down rain. Mm. And just to get to the door, we were mawing up in the mud over our shoes. Mm. And as we tried to go back and get our luggage out of the car, by now we're mawing up to our shins. And before we got everything unloaded, we're mawing up to our knees. You literally cannot walk in this mud. It's unbelievable. It's like quicksand. So now, Ray and I are in this little adobe house. There's no radio. There's no television. Certainly no internet. No cell phones. Nothing. It's just Ray and I. And it rained for 4 days. For 4 days, we could not go outside. So I heard every Ray Scott story that has ever been told. At the end of the 4th day, my ears were bleeding.
Did y'all argue at all during those 4 days? I mean, you're kept in a house with another man, nothing to entertain yourself with.
It was. I didn't even get a chance to get a word in edgewise. I'm listening to Ray, and he's like I am over you. He's such a dominant figure. He don't let me have a word edgewise.
I know what that's like.
I know you do. So listening to Ray, I mean, I got a history lesson. I got where he was coming from. He was an insurance salesman. He got the idea to organize bass fishing. He loved bass fishing. He saw the passion that everybody over the country had, and so he put this first tournament together at Beaver Lake, and I heard all of that and how it came about and all the fundraising efforts to try to get it done and all the different things. But what I learned, more important than the little details, I learned how Ray Scott was a dreamer. Man, he was a dreamer. And he had all these thoughts, and his mind never, ever stopped. Man, he's just going from one to another. And I was literally wore out at the end of a day. It was about an 18-hour day. I sat in a adobe house with Ray Scott and listened to all these ideas and all these dreams and where he had come from and where he intended to go. And I mean, it was just wearing me out. I was exhausted. I was so ready to go to bed when we finally broke for the night. And that went on for 4 days. So I learned a lot about Ray. So now I'm going to go back and circle the wagons and tell you about Forrest Wood. Forrest was the founder of Ranger Boats, and Forrest and Ray teamed together, and they worked together. Now, Ray has gotten all the credit for being the godfather, the father, and built the foundation for bass and competitive tournament fishing. But I think Forrest, whom never got the credit, had just as much to do with making it happen as did Ray. Ray was a dreamer with all these ideas, and Forrest was a cowboy. Forrest Wood was a rancher. Forrest Wood was a guy that got it done. You lay it out there, and Forrest is going to put it together.
Right.
And so Ray would have all these ideas, and he'd get Forrest excited about it, and Forrest would go to work on it, and he would support Ray financially with Ranger Boats and wood manufacturing and everything they had going on. Well, Ray would try to jump to the next big thing. Forrest said, "Hold on. Let's get this accomplished. Let's build it one piece at a time, just like he built his boats, handmade one at a time." And so that's the way Forrest kept Ray in check.
They balanced each other out. Their personalities were good together.
That's exactly. So I say that the foundation of professional bass fishermen were built by two people rather than one. It was by Ray Scott and Forrest Wood. Forrest was just as important as Ray, maybe more so in a lot of cases, because he kept things level, even, kept them going. And he inspired Ray, but he also kept Ray in check. So Forrest, who the founder of Ranger, built the foundation of Ranger on the success of bass. So bass was really important to Ranger Boats, but Ranger Boats was really important to bass. And so as this thing progressed and the sport started to grow, those two worked hand in hand. Forrest was probably the most credible person I've ever known. When Forrest Wood told you something, you could take it to the bank.
How did you get to know Forrest? Like, what was your first interaction with him?
Blake Honeycutt was the rep for Ranger Boats, and he was from Hickory, North Carolina, and I was from Maiden, North Carolina, so we're just a few miles apart. And Blake was a protege of Buck Perry, who was a deep water structure fisherman that I admired, and all that information was over my head, but it was coming together. So I admired Blake so much, and Blake linked me to Forrest.
Okay.
And so I bought a Ranger boat, and I went to Flippin, Arkansas in 1975 actually, to meet Forrest. And he was so cordial and so down to earth and treated me like I was somebody. I mean, I was just a kid. I hadn't even started fishing tournaments. I'd fished one tournament that time. But he treated me like I was a VIP and made me feel so good. My brother and I went together. We drove to Flippin from Maiden, North Carolina, which was a pretty long drive. And Forrest just was so cordial and so great. And he never forgot me. Every time I would see him, he'd say, "Well, Hank Parker, how are you doing?" It just made me feel like $1 million. So in 1978, when I made the Bassmaster Classic, the year before, I had won a tournament with National Bass. I had won Angler of the Year, not a tournament. Let me clarify that. The year before, I had won Angler of the Year with National Bass Association. Well, for that title, Angler of the Year, they furnished me with a boat, not a Ranger boat, a Hearst bass boat, and they paid all my entry fees. So that was 1977. So in 1978, I won. Let me go back. I won it in 77, but I also won it in 78. 77, I ran a competitive boat to Ranger. I owned a Ranger, but I didn't use it in the tournaments because I got paid to fish out of another brand boat. So in 1978, I fished both bass and National Bass and American Bass, all three organizations. Well, I won Angler of the Year for National and American Bass. So I got a boat furnished to me. So when I go to the Bassmaster Classic at Ross Barnett, Mississippi, Forrest Wood and Ray are in the courtyard at the hotel where we were staying, and they were talking, and the minute Forrest saw me, he said, "Hank Parker, come here, buddy, come here." So I walked up to Forrest, Ray walked away, and Forrest said, "Man, I want to congratulate you. You're just doing a great job. I've been watching the standings, and you've won Angler of the Year now twice, and I just want to congratulate you." I said, "Well, Forrest, it's bittersweet." And he looked at me and he said, "How in the world could it be bittersweet?" I said, "Well, I won Angler of the Year, and part of my prize money for that is a boat that is by a different manufacturer that I don't particularly like. But I can't turn them down because they're going to pay my entry fees in all the tournaments for the next year." And how in the world, I mean, we're talking thousands of dollars.
Yeah, it's something you can't pass up.
You just can't pass that up. And Forrest said, "Well, Hank, if it were a perfect world, what would you like?" I said, "Forrest, man, if I had that deal with Ranger, if I could get a Ranger boat and they would pay my entry fees and I didn't have to use that off-brand boat, I'd be the happiest guy in the world." And he looked at me without any facial expression, just stuck his hand out, and he said, "We can do that."
There you go.
Wow. Wait a minute. You can do what? "We can put you in a Ranger boat, and we can pay your entry fees." Wow. A dream come true. So that was a handshake deal. Until Forrest Wood sold Ranger boats, that handshake deal was our bond. We never had a paper contract. He paid all my entry fees. At the end of the year, he'd call me and say, "Hank, you got your new boat ordered?"
Wow.
It was just an amazing opportunity that he gave me. So had it not been for Forrest Wood, there probably honestly wouldn't have been a Hank Parker.
Yeah.
I mean, he helped me so much, morally, mentally, and financially. I couldn't have made it without him. So my admiration and respect for Forrest is over the top. But I got to know Forrest really close, and I would hang around he and Nina, and we would have dinner together at the tournaments, and he would share ideas with me and express. One of the kindest, warmest, most compassionate guys I've ever known, but he loved this sport, and he cared about the sport, and it didn't bother him at all that Ray got all the credit and he was just in the background. That didn't bother Forrest. His ego was non-existent, but he was very instrumental on building the foundation to where we are today.
Right. I mean, he is a genuine guy. I've met him twice, and he had that same energy that you were talking about, where he makes you feel loved. You know, he seemed like a really genuine guy.
And it's so real. It's so real. And he loved this sport, and he all the fishermen were important to him. So now here's what I say. The foundation of bass were built on two personalities, Ray Scott and Forrest Wood. And collectively, they worked together to build this broad foundation that supports this gigantic industry that we're involved in today. And there's never been enough credit given to Forrest. And in my opinion, today, there's not enough credit shared for Ray. I mean, they single-handedly built this whole thing that we're all growing and blowing and going, and multi-million dollar business for a lot of people. But it was Ray and Forrest Wood.
Wow.
And then here comes Johnny Morris. Johnny Morris has got a personality that is gigantic. And Johnny, he looks at the opportunity to take this thing to a different level. Now, he's an enterpriser. He's a businessman. He started the Outhouse. He started Bass Pro Shops. He started selling the rigged tracker boats. And he built this thing to a gigantic enterprise with Outdoor Worlds and Cabela stores all over this country. And so he showcased. I always told Johnny, I said, Johnny, you think about, most people think about bass fishing, They think about going to a little bait shop that's got dirt floors that sell minnows
Wow.
and live bait and dusty shelves. And you bring our sport to a different level. You walk in a Bass Pro Shop and it's, wow, look at this. Oh, and the merchandise is so well laid out. And it is just makes you proud to say, hey, I'm a bass fisherman. And so Johnny's took us to that level. So you take those 3 players, and here we've built this this foundation to support all of what we've got going on in our world today. And then you go back and you say, okay, so you say the 3 main players in this sport are Ray Scott, Forrest Wood, and Johnny Morris. Who are some of the other guys that were pioneers? What made this sport catapult and was so attractive to draw kids like myself and many, many, many other kids into the sport? Well, you bring in personalities. You know, Tom Mann. Tom Mann was bigger than life to me. Tom Mann was from Eufaula, Alabama. He came up with a jelly worm, a Little George, all these different baits. But Tom was a character. I mean, Tom was a character. Tom, one, he was just a gigantic, good-looking man, so he attracted a lot of people. He was extremely charismatic and friendly, and so he became a part of that fold with Ray, with Forrest, and with Johnny Morris. And so now this sport's starting to take a lot of different directions because you got different personalities coming in. You got Billy Westmoreland, who was a smallmouth fisherman from Dale Hollow, Tennessee. And so now you bring a Billy Westmoreland into the mix. And he's got a level of expertise that just beyond belief. And Bill Dance, a furniture salesman from Memphis, Tennessee. And Bill and Ray and Forrest all connected. You know, they were competitors, Forrest and Bill and Billy Westmoreland. But the one thing about the sport of bass fishing, especially in the early days, now ESPN tried to change this and they were not successful, and thank God they weren't. But before ESPN got involved, in the early days, it was so much camaraderie between all these personalities and all these fishermen, even though they were competing against each other. When they would come together, it was more like a family reunion.
Wow.
And so you didn't compete. Roland Martin never beat me. I never beat Larry Nixon. It was, I beat the lake that day. I caught the most fish. But it was not head-to-head competition like football, basketball, baseball, or any other organized sports, not even like NASCAR. See, that's what ESPN wanted to do. ESPN wanted to get the sport of bass fishing comparable to NASCAR. They wanted Kevin Van Dam to be against Mike Iaconelli, against Gerald Swindell, against Skeet Reeves, and they wanted to make it a bitter competition between rivals.
Right.
And that wasn't the way it was at all. And so they were not successful at doing that, thank God. It was an effort, but it was a temporary period of time there that it was a little disruption. But this whole sport was built on all these personalities coming together and the camaraderie. And they all worked for the same purpose, for the opportunity to build a sport that we could compete in, that we could make it bigger, we could make it better, we could get more money involved. We could do a lot of things collectively and be much, much stronger than individually. And that worked.
Right.
And you brought in people like Bobby Murray, incredible fisherman with a lot of personality. And then it just kept growing, and it kept growing. Don Butler from Oklahoma, who won the second Bassmaster Classic, I believe. Bobby won the first one, then Don. Don was a businessman from Oklahoma that just got involved. He worked together with Ray. So unusual to have an organization that's headed up, you've got the sanctioning body with rules and regulations. Normally, there's friction there. You know, everybody wants to kill a referee if the call goes against them, you know,
Right.
in football. But then if
Yeah.
the call goes for you, you love the referee. Well, the sanction organization is, they enforce rules.
Right.
So normally, the competitors, they've got a little chip.
Against him, yeah.
Yeah. That didn't happen. It didn't happen. It was camaraderie. It was respect. And it was working together to build the sport, to grow legs, to keep going, to keep going, to keep going. And just laying bricks, you know, laying bricks, stacking the wall, getting it higher. And so you look back and you say, okay, that's pretty interesting. Now, I got involved as a kid with a dream of being a part of all that. And so I got to engage on a level when it was really just getting started. I mean, it had already, the foundation, the footers had been poured, but there hadn't been very many bricks laid at my involvement. So now I'm watching the dynamics of this. I'm watching from a distance, and I'm seeing how it's all coming together. And then great personalities with lots of charismatic personalities getting involved. You got Ricky Clunn. Ricky was a guy, people ask me, so what do you think about Ricky Clunn? Ricky Clunn was a guy, in my opinion, that didn't have a lot of natural ability.
Wow.
Ricky loved to fish, but it didn't come easy for him. But he worked so hard, and Ricky's very, very smart. And he set his strategies, he disciplined himself, he worked, and became one of the greatest fishermen in the history of the world
That's awesome.
through a work ethic. And then you look at Larry Nixon, they say, what do you think of Larry Nixon? Larry Nixon had more natural ability than anybody ever seen. It just seemed so easy for Larry. He could just read a lake. It just always fascinated me. And of course, he was a hard worker as well, but it just was so natural to Ricky. And then you look back and you look at all these different players, and I know I'm skipping around a lot, but all these individuals had a part to growing this thing.
How did all of that make you feel? Like seeing everybody kind of work together, or just seeing all of these different personalities and thinking, where does Hank fit in that?
It was such a learning, and that's a great question. It was such a learning curve for me. I was just soaking it in like a sponge, man. I know I drew Tommy Martin in a tournament. He had just won the Bassmaster Classic, and about 2 years later, I drew him in a tournament, American Bass Tournament, on Clarks Hill Reservoir in Georgia. And you look at bass fishing from the late 60s, transition into the 70s, you think about sitting in a front seat, casting a plastic worm, people smoking a pipe, sipping a cup of coffee. That was the projected way to bass fish. Enjoy your time.
Leisure.
Well, here's Tommy Martin. He is like his hair is on fire. He's trying to make 15 casts a minute. I mean, he's a machine. I marveled at his skill level, his dedication, and his ethic. Man, he worked from the moment that shotgun blast took place. Tommy is so intense. He's so focused, and he wants to make every single cast in that 8 hours that we have to compete as he possibly can. He don't want to waste 1 second. Man, did I learn so much. And I saw myself on how I could improve on not wasting time. Man, Tommy wasted nothing. He'd throw that troll motor down, and I mean, he's casting before the boat ever quits moving, you know?
Right.
I just learned so much. And Ricky Green, Ricky and Tommy were buddies, and they were fishing it, and it almost looked like a video that you clicked on high speed. I mean, we came together and passed each other, and I'm thinking, golly bum. So that was my first introductory to Ricky Green or Tommy Martin. And both of those guys did not waste 1 second of the day. And they would position their boat where they would be so close to the structure that they were just picking those bushes apart on Clarks Hill. And it was an interesting learning experience. And so that's kind of the way that I view this sport. I looked at all these individuals. I looked at Forrest and Ray and Johnny, who built the foundation that got this thing up and got it going. And then all these personalities contributed without conflict.
Wow. That's really rare, too. And you already know that a lot of these sports channels, they want to sensationalize on the drama or the suspense on it. And it's awesome that y'all all kind of stayed intact.
And that is what is so different about this sport of bass fishing. And that is why it came to the level that it did, because you got all these dynamic personalities coming together and working together and building the sport without conflict. You got Roland Martin. Roland, nobody can imagine how great that guy is. It was unbelievable. The first 3 years that I competed, now, I won a few tournaments in that time, but Roland was in contention to win every single tournament I fished going into the last day.
Wow.
Now, he didn't win them all, but he won a bunch of them. But going into the last day of competition, he was always in contention to win. Nobody else was. I mean, he was in a league kind of by himself.
Yeah.
9-time Bass Angler of the Year, which is unbelievable. But he was a guy that was more on the edge than anybody else.
Wow.
He was right there. I mean, there's 15 Roland Martin rules. they made rules that you can't do that. You can't do that. Roland Martin rule, Roland Martin rule, Roland Martin. Roland stayed on the edge. He wanted to win. I mean, that rascal wanted to win. So, but you take all these personalities and you get guys that are so fired up and so dedicated, but yet they come together to work together for the good of the sport.
That's awesome. The whole reason why you're there. I mean, it blows my mind even watching you fish. Like, I went back and watched some of the videos. I'm like, that is not me at all. I can find you every stick, every tree branch in the pond but the fish. I mean, if someone's getting their line stuck on something, it's me every time.
Well, I thought I was a pretty good caster till a guy named Dave Glebe came to the scene. Glebe came from California, and he was a protege and an undergraduate of D. Thomas, the king and the founder of the flipping technique. And when Glebe came on the scene, it was unbelievable. He could stand back 40 feet and put a jig in a coffee cup every time. I mean, just amazing how accurate he was. And, of course, he learned that from D. Thomas. And I got to fish with Glebe. I drew him in a tournament in New York, and it was quite an amazing day. And that was one of the things that is different today. In the early days, all the way up until I retired in 1990, we fished with other competitors. So I would draw Ken Cook. I would draw Larry Nixon. I would draw Rick Clun. I would draw Roland. And so you fished with the guys you competed against.
Yeah, you touched on that a bit last time when you were talking about the pork rinds.
That was Bobby Murray, yeah. I fished with Bobby Murray.
Yeah.
The guys today, they have observers or co-anglers who's not allowed to fish their water. That's got benefits, but they're missing out on a lot of learning opportunities that took place. Man, I learned. I made up my mind, regardless of who I drew as a partner, I was going to learn something.
Right.
And I wanted to expand my knowledge, and I wanted to learn from everybody. Man, and when you fish with a guy like Clun or a guy like Nixon or Roland, man, you learn so much. And so you mix all that together. And you take all this knowledge. Roland moved to Florida. He was in Oklahoma. Then he moved to Florida. You got Dance in Tennessee. You got Bobby Murray in Arkansas. And you got D. Thomas from California. You got David Glebe from California. You got Don Ivino from Arizona. You got all these people from all over the country coming together, sharing information and knowledge.
Wow.
And you gain so much depth and knowledge. I tell people all the time, tournament fishermen are way more knowledgeable than people that don't fish tournaments. Now, I didn't say tournament fishermen are better fishermen. There's some great fishermen that have never fished a tournament. But when you go out, before bass came along and before these tournaments were organized, in your mind, you got a fishing buddy.
Right.
And y'all fish together all the time. And you're either the greatest fisherman in the world or he is. If he beats you, you think, well, we're the two greatest fishermen in the world. And you go out on the lake and you fish all day long and you don't get a bite. You think, man, they were not biting. Fish, it was a bad day, it was a high pressure, whatever the excuse is, they just weren't biting. But then when the tournaments came along, you get in the tournament and you go out, you and your partner, you fish all day and you think, well, they just weren't biting today. And you come to the weigh-in and there's Larry Nixon with 40 pounds. How in the world did he catch all those fish? That's crazy. Man, I didn't think the fish were biting.
Right.
So then you learn at the end of the tournament what you did that did not work and what they did
That did.
that did. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's so much knowledge that you gain. And so that's why you mix all that together, you build the foundation, you get credibility. You got a guy like Ray Scott, and Ray's biggest deal in the world. If anybody ever cheated, if you ever got caught cheating, you're permanently banned. You're out. You'll never be back. You won't fish again. And Ray, you know, it'd be kind of like herding cats when you think about it. You get all these egos and you get all these competitors and you get all these opinions. And to be able to keep that in check and for all these guys to come together and work together for the good of the sport.
That's awesome. To circle back on the team thing, what do you think changed that? Why did they change it to where you're just solo?
You know, I think there were just so much effort to for the pros to be independent, where they didn't have to flip a coin to see whose boat they rode in. That they wanted their own identity. They wanted to be in control, and it was always a tough spot. And there were a lot of guys that were less diplomatic than others. So there was a big push by probably the majority of the pros to say, hey, we want to be able to do our own thing in every event and not have to deal with competing against each other. We would love to have co-anglers.
Wow.
And in the Classic, the Bassmaster Classic, all year we would compete with other fishermen. But when we got to the Classic, we'd have outdoor riders. We would not have a competitive fisherman. So the outdoor riders would give us the latitude to make our own decisions, do our own thing, and not cast in front of us. And so people loved that. And they got a little taste of that at the Classic. So they said, man, I wish every tournament was like this. I wish I had these same liberties in every tournament that I fish. So that's kind of how it gravitated and got to that point. I think they miss a lot. I think there's a lot of information. Now, of course, we've got television cameras in every boat now. So the secret's out. And so I guess it's all coming together and we can all learn. I learn, I watch Major League Fishing. I watch the elite tournaments. I follow it on the internet, and I see how a lot of these guys are doing things. And so there's still a lot of information out there. But in our day, we didn't have that. We didn't have televisions. We didn't even have Bass didn't start their television show till like 87 or 88. So it was a big void. Now, with the way it works, it's okay. Because there is so much information through the media, through video, so it all works out.
That's
But you lost something there. There's not quite the same camaraderie. The one thing that helped me, I think, to be more competitive, I tried to be diplomatic. A lot of these dominant pros, they immediately offended their partner because they were so dominant.
Yeah.
And I would try to listen to my partner. And I'd say, well, what you got going on? You know, we had 3 days of practice. You've been practicing? Oh, yeah, I practice pretty hard. Well, tell me what you got going on. And I would listen to him. And then at the end of his conversation, I would come in and I'd say, okay, well, I think we can work together. I've got something going. what area of the lake? And he'd start describing the area of the lake. Well, that's good because I've been in that area also, and I think collectively we can work together. And I would always tell my partner, and I meant this, I'd say, hey, tomorrow you and I are not competing against each other. Even though technically we were, our scores were individually scored, so we were still competitors. But in my opinion, in my mindset, we're not competing against each other today. We're working as a team.
Right. That's awesome.
And that helped me so much. And I would always try to be courteous. Now, there were a part of me at times, I know I was a little aggressive, and I probably didn't cut as much slack as I should have, you know, but I tried to. I wanted to, and we did work as a team. And you grew respect from that, and the word got out. You know, the guys that were dominant and tried to push their partners around, they always had a harder time than I did. I usually got partners that would work with me.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's rare.
So now let me circle back. I wanted to talk about the foundation, the personalities, from my perspective, what I saw, how I saw it all come together, and how we built this foundation to get the sport to where it is today. And so we started with Ray and Forrest, picked up with Johnny. Now we're talking about all these personalities, and I left out so many names, so many people that are so important to the sport, and I just hit on a few. Now, where did I fit in?
Right.
How did I take what I had learned and make it work for me? Well, I saw when this whole thing first started, the way that the tackle companies promoted their lures, their rods, their reels, their fishing line, all the stuff, the way they promoted was with outdoor riders. There would be outdoor riders all over the country. They would mail them rods and reels, made them field testers. You test this product, you write articles about them. So then the dynamic personalities of Tom Mann, Roland Martin, Bill Dance came into play. Now, who's got the most influence in the marketplace? Is it the outdoor riders, or is it professional fishermen? Well, it's always been outdoor riders. Professional fishermen didn't exist. So now there's a big fight in the minds of the fishing tackle manufacturers. Who's got the most influence in the market? Well, as I got involved, it was still about 50-50. It was about half of the budget was going toward outdoor riders. The other half of the budget was going toward professional fishermen. Well, as I got more involved, boy, the outdoor riders' influence started waning, and the professional angler went through the roof. So now, how do you get sponsorship? I have this question all the time from these high school kids. Man, how do I get sponsors? Well, let me tell you how you get sponsors. First of all, you're asking for a handout if you're not in a position to help that company gain market by your influence. So if you win enough tournaments, if you've got enough influence in the marketplace, and in my opinion, if you're credible, if you don't lie about it, if you tell the truth, if you believe in this product, and you say to this manufacturer, hey, I want to work with you. I want to help you sell more product, but I need this amount of money to be able to fish on the tournament circuit. Then you work together to get together to come up with a fair exchange. You compensate me this amount of money, I'm going to influence the market well enough to offset that. So it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. If you don't have influence in the marketplace to get that consumer to believe in what you're saying about a product, then you're unworthy of sponsorship.
Right. I mean, but that's totally fair. You know, it's a business. They can't just go hand out things to you because, I mean, what if they're taking a risk on you. So if they're not getting anything back, they could just be losing. And if they do that for everybody, are you even running a business? That's
right. And that's exactly, that's right to the point. If you don't have enough influence in the marketplace to help them create sales, at the end of the day, if they pay you $10,000 a year and you don't offset that by selling $100,000 worth of product, then you're a liability and not an asset. So sponsorship goes in hand with success and being able to reach the consumer with influence. So I realized that. I realized that pretty early. Well, now the outdoor rider influence has faded. The professional fisherman influence has grown. Dance is the king. Bill Dance is the king promoter. Man, he had all the sponsors, and he was doing a great job for them. They all wanted Bill because Bill moved the needle. He made things happen. So now I'm seeing that. And the confidence Forrest Wood had in me to agree, my first big sponsor ever, on a handshake, that he had that much confidence that I was going to be a great fisherman someday, and I was going to be well accomplished, and I would be a good investment for Ranger.
Wow.
Forrest didn't just hand that out to me because he was a nice guy. Forrest saw potential that if I've done as well as I've done my first couple of years, I'm going to really be a great fisherman someday, and it'll pay dividends for Ranger.
Yeah. He saw that potential.
But in order to do that, I had to be an honest person. I had to be credible. I had to be of good character, or it's all worthless. So I owed Forrest respect, and I owed him integrity from my perspective. I had to build that in order to be a fair deal, fair return to Forrest for the confidence he showed in me. Then Tom Bedell. Tom Bedell, in 1978, I signed a deal with Berkeley Trilene. I fished their line, and when I went to the Classic in 79, they had an incentive program that if you win the Bassmaster Classic on Berkeley Trilene, we're going to put you in a position to do store promotions and markets, and we're going to pay you for ads, and we'll compensate you based on your finish in the Bassmaster Classic. The winner really had strong incentives. Well, I won.
Wow.
And so Tom Bedell supported me. I said earlier, had it not been for Forrest Wood, there would have been no Hank Parker. Also true with Tom Bedell. Tom Bedell at Berkeley showed more confidence in me, just like Forrest. I mean, he supported me, he helped me, he believed in me, and he gave me opportunity. And when I saw that opportunity, I really wanted to put it together. I wanted to be a real asset. I wanted them to say at the end of the day, man, we did a good thing by sponsoring Hank Parker. Mm. That was so important to me. And so that's how I started building. And then, I got 5 kids. And toward the middle of my career, I started getting really torn on my priorities. I was so involved in tournament fishing. I was traveling all the time. I'm working with all these different sponsors. I'm trying to do so many things. I'm neglecting my wife, my children, and my priorities are out of whack. So now I got so many things going on mentally, but I'm still trying to build, to support, to live my dream, to make a living as a bass fisherman.
Right.
So I got all these things going on, and I saw the opportunity if I ever win the Classic again. The Bassmaster Classic, for a lot of people, and I think it varies with individuals, the harder you work it, the more opportunity and the more money you can make. But truthfully, for me, both Bassmaster Classics were life-changing money for me. Life-changing money. The opportunity to promote, the opportunity to do promotions and get royalties on products and all the things that go along with that title, it was life-changing money.
Yeah.
So as I built these relationships with Tom Manns, with Humminbird, with Minn Kota, with Ranger, with Mercury Outboards, with Berkeley, as time went on, with Fenwick, Abu Garcia, all these companies that I worked with, as time went on, I had a great sponsor base. and I was making a lot of money, and everything was working fine. But now it's time for me to go to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the old days, you tried to win as many tournaments as you could, but you also tried to have relationships with Homer Circle at Sports Afield magazine. I'd call Uncle Homer, and he would refer me over to Mark Sosin, the writers for Sports Afield, and I'd come up with ideas for articles. And you'd always try to get Bob Cobb over at Bassmaster to include you in an article. But you didn't have any control over your own destiny. So the only way you could control where you were going is if you had your own media. Mm. So that was television. So in '85, we started airing on television. And so now I'm really torn. Mm. I got kids that want to race go-karts. I got kids that want to go hunting. I got kids that want to go fishing, and I'm all over the world.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, how in the world can I put all this together and maintain everything that we built? So I knew if I ever won the Classic again, that would afford me the opportunity to step away from competitive fishing. Although I didn't want to do that. I was 36 years old.
Right.
I was at the peak. I had learned so much. I was a tournament seasoned professional when I quit. That was a difficult thing to walk away with. Now, I look back 30-something years later, smartest thing I ever did. Man, my kids call me every day.
Yeah.
I have an incredible relationship. I invested more in my kids than I did in my career.
I mean, that's what matters. I mean, at the end of it, your career isn't forever, but your family is.
I like that, and that's exactly right. So I say all this. I got involved. I watched the sport grow. I watched the foundation. Then I took it all in. I built my own career. I started my own television show. In 1989 at the Bassmaster Classic when I won, I knew then I was retired and from competitive bass fishing. I never looked back. I went back and fished 3 tournaments after that. They had this superstar tournament. I competed in all that, finished second in the first 2, didn't do so well in the last one. But that was my career that I built, and I've kept it going through television and now through YouTube and now through a podcast and the different things we're doing. So all of that I bring into perspective to say I have been on the ground floor of the development, and I have watched. I have known the personalities that were the giant contributors personally. I got so many more people to talk about, so many more friends that influence this sport, but that's for another podcast.
Absolutely. That's awesome.
But we have gone from 0 to current times with where I'm at. And things are rapidly changing in the world of linear television. All this social media stuff is new to me. I got some young guys that are helping me head this thing up. I don't have a clue what I'm doing, but you young people know how to make all this happen, and so I'm so dependent. But I can say this to all the viewers of my podcast. I'm so grateful that we're getting the numbers that we're getting. I'm so grateful, and I want everybody to subscribe and be a part of what we're doing on YouTube and on this podcast and all of our social platforms. We're trying to do it all because I'm not through. I'm not ready to step away. I still think I have things to contribute.
Right.
And I want to talk about positive things. I want to talk about the camaraderie, the friendship, the people, the foundation, and what the sport is all about itself. And I want to share that.
That's awesome.
And so help me out, guys. Subscribe and be a part of this. And I hope I won't let you down. I hope I don't get too boring. I just want to tell my story from my perspective, and I've done the best I could at that today.
I think you did great. I think you did great.
You did. I was kind of all over the place, but it takes all that to establish the relationships and how I knew the players so well. I knew them on a lot different term than just showing up and meeting them for a day or two.
Right. You knew them on a personal level.
A very personal level. So hopefully it's been fun, and I love it. I just love telling these stories, and I love this platform, the opportunity to get me to get the chance to share with you the sport of bass fishing from my perspective.
Yeah, awesome.
And I like a little bit of youth to kind of keep me in check.
Just a little bit. Trying my best.
You're doing a good job. Hey, thanks for being with us today. Sarah Beth, tell them goodbye.
All right, goodbye. We'll see you guys next week.
All right, God bless you. See you next time.
The house needs painting, grass needs mowing. Where's he at?
Hi, this is Hank. Sorry I missed your call. Leave me your name and your number, and I'll get back to you.
He's gone fishing.